Today we're focusing on a really unique and frankly immediate clinical emergency, methemoglobinemia.
Right.
It's rare, but it presents this massive trap for any provider because the one piece of equipment we trust for oxygen, the pulse oximeter, it just actively lies to us.
It does. And if you mistake this for, standard respiratory failure, the consequences can be disastrous.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We see a patient who isn't getting enough oxygen, and we immediately think it's a gas exchange problem in the lungs. But this isn't that.
No, this is a blood problem. It's a disorder of iron oxidation right there inside the hemoglobin molecule itself.
So what does that mean, iron oxidation?
Well, under normal conditions, the iron atom in hemoglobin is in what's called the divalent or ferrous state. We write that as Fe2+.
And that's the only state that works.
That is the only state where iron can successfully bind oxygen in the lungs and then, crucially, release it in the tissues.
Oh, what goes wrong here?
In methemoglobinemia, some kind of oxidizing agent comes along and forces that ferrous iron, the Fe2+, to convert into the trivalent or ferric state. That's Fe3+.
And once it's Fe3+,
it's useless. It is structurally incapable of binding oxygen. That hemoglobin molecule is, for all intents and purposes, out of commission.
So if a patient has, say, 30% of their hemoglobin converted to methemoglobin, is that basically like losing 30% of their blood volume?
Precisely. It creates what we call a functional anemia. Your hemoglobin count on a lab test might be perfectly normal.
But it's not working.
Right. 30 or 40% of those molecules are just inert passengers. It causes this severe inadequacy in oxygen transport.
But the pathology, it goes even deeper than just losing the carrying capacity, right?
Right.
There's this massive secondary effect on the hemoglobin that's still working.
Oh, that's where it gets truly insidious. The presence of methemoglobin causes this allosteric change across the entire molecule.
Okay.
And that change pushes the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve way over to the left.
And why should a clinician be absolutely terrified of a left shift in this particular context?
Because a left shift means that the remaining normal functional hemoglobin, it starts binding oxygen with an incredibly high affinity. Just holds on to it.
It won't let go.
It refuses to release it in the peripheral tissues where it is desperately needed. So it's a vicious cycle. You have less capacity, and the oxygen you do carry can't be delivered.
That is a brutal 1-2 punch. It completely explains the profound tissue hypoxia we see. Okay, before symptoms, let's just quickly classify the types. There's congenital and acquired. Why is the acquired form the one we're focused on today?
The congenital forms are very rare. They're usually from an enzyme deficiency like cytochrome B5 reductase.
Yeah.
And patients are often less severe.
They've compensated over time.
Exactly. They're often compensated chronically, or their baseline levels are low enough that they don't just acutely crash.
Whereas the acquired form is an acute poisoning.
Yes. Acquired methemoglobinemia is caused by exposure to oxidizing drugs or toxins. That's the one that causes the clinical crash. The level can climb from, 5% to 50% in under an hour.
Wow.
It demands immediate reversal.
So what are the top oxidizing agents that need to be on our radar when we see a patient with unexplained cyanosis?
We can break them down into categories.
Right.
First, local anesthetics are major culprits.
Like which ones?
Particularly benzocaine, prilocaine, lidocaine, and tetracaine. Benzocaine sprays, the ones often used for rapid procedures like endoscopy, are especially notorious for this.
Okay, got it. What about cardiovascular drugs?
Nitrates. They are highly oxidizing, so you need to look for nitroglycerin, sodium nitroprusside infusions, or even inhaled nitric oxide in the ICU setting.
And other medications?
Sure. Certain antibiotics like dapsone and sulfonamides and some antimalarials can do it as well.
Let's step outside the hospital for a second. Common environmental exposures.
Environmental causes often boil down to nitrites. You can find these in high concentrations in contaminated well water, which is a big problem for infants who are very susceptible.
And I've also heard about agricultural products.
Yes, things like fertilizers or herbicides, and we are seeing it more and more from recreational substances that contain nitrites, sometimes called poppers.
Okay. The speed of onset is really the key here. Let's try to match the clinical symptoms to the methemoglobin percentage. What's a normal baseline for you and me?
A normal Met-Hep-B percentage is very low. It's typically kept well below 2.5%.
And when do symptoms start to appear?
Well, levels between 3 and 15% are usually asymptomatic.
Yeah.
You definitely don't see cyanosis. The body can compensate for that pretty easily.
But once you cross that 20% mark?
At 20 to 30%, patients are always symptomatic. They'll report significant fatigue, shortness of breath, anxiety, and you'll almost always see tachycardia.
And this is the point where we really have to intervene. What does it look like when a patient is truly crashing?
When you get above 40%, that's a life-threatening emergency. We see profound systemic effects: epileptic seizures, worsening coma, critical cardiac arrhythmias.
And the labs would show.
A key sign of that overwhelming tissue hypoxia is a severely elevated lactate level. It can spike above 15, even 20 millimoles per liter.
And if it gets as high as 70%.
Levels greater than 70% are almost always fatal. It leads to irreversible coma and just a rapid cardiovascular collapse.
Given how fast this happens, you have to recognize it long before that 40% level.
You do.
So many patients in the ER look hypoxic and tired. How do we pull this one diagnosis out from all the others? What is the clinical triad we need to look for?
The critical triad is refractory hypoxia, the cyanosis saturation gap, and the visibly dark brown blood color.
Okay, let's start with refractory hypoxia. Describe the bizarre numbers we see on the pulse oximeter.
The patient looks terrible, maybe they're blue, but their SpO2 reading is weirdly stable. It's consistently in the low to mid 80s, say, between 82 and 86%.
And the key is?
The key is that this reading refuses to go up. Even when you put them on 100% inspired oxygen with a non-rebreather mask, the reading just sits there.
You can't fix it with oxygen.
You can't. The machine just cannot read this diseased blood correctly.
Which leads right into that second point, the cyanosis saturation gap. We're taught that central cyanosis, seeing blue in the lips and tongue, only happens when saturation is dangerously low, usually below 75%.
That's right, for normal hemoglobin. With methemoglobinemia, the patient is visibly cyanotic, yet the pulse oximeter is telling you their saturation is between 80 and 90%.
A huge disconnect.
A massive one. A difference of more than 5% between the saturation calculated from an arterial blood gas and that pulse ox reading is highly, highly suspicious.
It's just the weirdest sign. Now, if we ignore the machine and just look at the patient's blood, what's that shocking visual clue?
The blood is often described as chocolate-colored, dark brown, almost black.
And it stays that way.
It does. If you draw a tube of it and put it on a white piece of gauze, it stays dark brown. Normal deoxygenated blood will absorb oxygen from the air and turn bright red pretty quickly. Methemoglobinemia blood does not.
Just seeing that should trigger immediate action.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have this high clinical suspicion. We know the pulse oximeter is failing us. How do we get a definitive diagnosis and an accurate level?
The definitive diagnosis requires co-oximetry. That is the gold standard for measuring Met-Hep-B levels.
Let's break that down because it's so important. Why does the standard pulse oximeter fail?
Standard pulse oximeters are designed to be simple. They work by measuring light absorption at only two wavelengths, usually 660 and 940 nanometers. They assume only two types of hemoglobin exist, oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin.
But there's a third player here.
Exactly. Methemoglobin isn't in its programming. And it turns out that methemoglobin absorbs light pretty much equally at both of those standard wavelengths.
So the machine gets confused.
It gets completely confused. It sees this equal absorption ratio, and it defaults to calculating an artificially stable saturation reading right in that 82 to 86% range, no matter what's actually happening to the patient.
So the SpO2 reading isn't just inaccurate, it's a lie based on a false assumption.
It's a profound technical failure. Co-oximetry gets around this by using 4 or more specific wavelengths.
You can see everything.
It can see and quantify multiple forms, including carboxyhemoglobin, sulfhemoglobin, and crucially methemoglobin, which has a very distinct absorption peak at 631 nanometers.
Okay, so we've confirmed it with co-oximetry,
Right.
Or our clinical suspicion is just sky high. We have to move to management. What's the first step?
Supportive care is number one while you prepare the antidote. That means maximizing supplemental oxygen because the functional hemoglobin you have left needs to be 100% saturated.
And stop the cause.
And critically, you must immediately discontinue the causative agent. Whether it's a topical anesthetic, a nitro drip, whatever it is, stop it.
What is the specific antidote and when do we use it?
Methylene blue is the rapid antidote of choice.
And the indication.
It's indicated for any patient who is symptomatic, really regardless of the percentage, or for any asymptomatic patient whose Met-Hep-B level is greater than 30%.
Give us the standard dosing.
The dose is 1 to 2 milligrams per kilogram of actual body weight. It needs to be given intravenously over a minimum of 5 minutes. Slow administration is key.
How quickly do we see a change?
The clinical effect is often visible within minutes. You should see their skin color improve, and the cyanosis usually resolves completely within an hour.
What if that's not enough? Can we redose?
Yes, you can re-administer it after 60 minutes if the patient is still very symptomatic or cyanotic, but you have to be cautious. The maximum accumulated dose is 7 milligrams per kilogram.
And what's the risk if we go above that ceiling?
If you push past 7 milligrams per kilogram, methylene blue actually reverses its own therapeutic action.
Wow.
Instead of acting as a reducing agent, it can start to act as an oxidizing agent, which can actually worsen the methemoglobinemia and even trigger acute hemolysis.
That is a critical warning.
Yeah.
Now, we have to talk about the huge contraindication, the thing that stops us from using methylene blue. That's glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency.
Correct. G6PD deficiency is the absolute contraindication. It's present in about 2% of the U.S. population, but it's much more common in people of Mediterranean, African, or Southeast Asian descent.
So you have to know their status.
You really do. Screening is vital when you're thinking about methylene blue.
Why does this pathway matter so much? Why is the drug useless without it?
Well, methylene blue doesn't directly reduce the ferric iron. It actually needs the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate hydrogen, the NADPH enzyme pathway to be working.
It's an intermediary.
Right. Methylene blue is reduced to something called leukomethylene blue by NADPH. And it's that leukomethylene blue that finally reduces the methemoglobin back to functional hemoglobin.
So if you're G6PD deficient, you can't make enough NADPH.
Exactly. The whole reduction pathway just stalls out. And not only is the methylene blue ineffective, it can cause a severe life-threatening hemolytic crisis in that patient.
Okay, so if we have a known G6PD deficient patient, or we can't wait for the test, what are our alternatives?
For those patients, you can try high-dose ascorbic acid or vitamin C. The usual dose is 1.5 to 3 grams given intravenously every 6 hours.
Anything else?
You can add riboflavin, vitamin B2 to enhance that pathway.
And if that still fails, if the patient is still unstable?
Then you have to consider more intensive things like an exchange transfusion or hyperbaric oxygen therapy. But those are, very resource-heavy and hard to get started urgently.
And what should clinicians absolutely avoid using in an acute resuscitation?
N-acetylcysteine. It's been tried, but it's repeatedly shown no benefit and is not recommended. And while ascorbic acid is an alternative, it's generally considered way too slow to be effective on its own in a patient who is seizing or comatose.
That makes sense.
And one last warning for post-treatment monitoring. After you give methylene blue, you have to know that the drug literally turns the patient's blood blue or green.
Which will affect the pulse oximeter again.
It will. This color change will temporarily cause the standard pulse ox reading to drop, sometimes way down. It creates this transient false dip in the SpO2 measurement.
So a drop in the reading isn't necessarily treatment failure. It's just a sign the medication is circulating.
That's right.
Okay, let's summarize this for everyone.
Acquired methemoglobinemia is an acute, life-threatening disorder. It's caused by oxidizing agents that convert essential ferrous iron, Fe2+, to the non-functional ferric state, Fe3+.
And the diagnosis relies on a really high index of suspicion, recognizing that paradox, the refractory hypoxia, and that cyanosis saturation gap where the pulse oximeter is deceptively stable.
Right.
Initial management is all about supportive care and, most importantly, removing the inciting agent immediately. And methylene blue is the rapid antidote for symptomatic patients or anyone with a level over 30%. But you must confirm the patient is not G6PD deficient first.
Here is a final thought for you. You have to expand your thinking beyond just pharmaceuticals. While we associate this with local anesthetics, remember that acquired forms can come from really unexpected sources.
Like what?
Contaminated food. We've seen cases from vegetable puree that was stored too long where naturally occurring nitrates converted to nitrites. So you have to maintain a high index of suspicion in any patient with unexplained cyanosis.
Is it in chronic cases?
Even in chronic cases that might have been misdiagnosed as something else, like, say, refractory asthma, because swift recognition and intervention is the only thing that prevents a fatal outcome here.